"You will have my name, my protection, and every comfort I can provide," the Duke of Blackwood said immediately, after placing the wedding ring upon Clara Vale's finger. "But I cannot promise you the heart your brother took with him to the grave." Clara did not flinch. The chapel still held the scent of extinguished candles and white lilies. 30 members of the highest families in the county watched from the polished pews, waiting to see whether the 32-year-old spinster would weep before the man who had married her out of obligation. She gave Adrian Blackwood the same calm look she had worn while creditors inventoried her childhood home. "Fortunately, your grace, your heart was not included in the settlement." A startled breath passed through the congregation. Adrian's expression changed. For one brief moment, the cold discipline of the former cavalry officer gave way to surprise. Then he offered Clara his arm and escorted her from the chapel. Outside, church bells announced a marriage that neither bride nor groom had sought. 8 months earlier, Clara's elder brother, Captain Nathaniel Vale, had died during an ambush in France. Adrian had returned alone, carrying Nathaniel's sword and a sealed letter containing his final request. According to that letter, Nathaniel had asked his closest friend to protect Clara if he did not survive the war. Adrian had interpreted protection as marriage. Clara had refused him twice. She did not want to become a living memorial to her brother, or a debt Adrian believed honor required him to pay. But the Vale estate was collapsing beneath obligations Nathaniel had apparently concealed. Creditors threatened to seize the house, while 12 widows of men who had served beside him faced eviction from cottages built on Vale land. A marriage settlement offered Clara enough security to keep them housed. She had accepted Adrian's proposal for their sake. During the wedding breakfast at Blackwood Hall, Clara sat beside her new husband, beneath portraits of generations of unsmiling dukes. Guests offered congratulations that sounded suspiciously like condolences. Across the table, Lord Percival Blackwood raised his glass. "To duty," he declared, "the strongest foundation upon which any sensible marriage may be built." Percival was Adrian's uncle, a silver-haired man with polished manners and an unsettling habit of touching other people's possessions. Since the death of Adrian's father, he had managed the family's investments, military charities, and parliamentary connections. Adrian lifted his glass, but did not drink. Clara noticed that. "You disagree with your uncle?" she asked quietly. "I believe duty is more reliable than affection. Reliable things can still become prisons." His eyes settled upon her face. "You made your choice freely. Within the choices poverty permitted me." Before Adrian could respond, Percival placed a familiar envelope beside Clara's plate. "Nathaniel's final letter," he said. "I thought you might wish to keep it now that his request has been fulfilled." Clara's hand stopped above the envelope. Adrian had allowed her to read the letter after proposing, but grief had blurred its details. She remembered Nathaniel's handwriting and the final instruction, asking Adrian to ensure she would never be left without protection. Now she examined the red wax more carefully. The Vale crest, a hawk above 3 waves, leaned distinctly toward the left. Nathaniel had been particular about his seals. Their father taught them both that a crooked impression suggested haste, concealment, or interference. Nathaniel always centered the crest before the wax cooled. Clara touched the roughened edge. The seal had been lifted and pressed down again. "Who received this letter?" she asked. Adrian glanced at the envelope. "My uncle collected Nathaniel's effects from the War Office while I was recovering." Percival smiled. "The ministry required assistance identifying which belongings belonged to the Vale family." "Did you open it?" "Certainly not." Clara looked at him. "The seal has been disturbed." Conversation around them softened. Percival gave a sympathetic sigh. Grief often persuades us that ordinary imperfections possess hidden meaning. Adrian's shoulders stiffened. He disliked scenes, particularly those involving the dead friend whose name had brought them to this table. "It travelled from France," he said. "The wax may have cracked." "It did not crack. It was warmed." "Clara," the warning in his voice was quiet but unmistakable. She could have yielded. A dutiful bride would have placed the envelope away, smiled at the guests, and allowed the day to proceed without discomfort. Instead, Clara held the letter toward the nearest candle. A faint line crossed the paper below Nathaniel's signature. It appeared to be an ordinary fold, but the fibers were thinner there, as though another strip had been cut away before the sheet was closed. Someone had altered her brother's final message. "What exactly did Nathaniel ask of you?" she said. Adrian's face hardened. You read the letter. I read the portion someone permitted us to keep. Lord Percival set down his glass. Surely you are not suggesting that your brother's dying wish was manufactured. I am suggesting this paper was opened and cut. The Duke rose. The movement silenced the entire table. My friend died because he returned for wounded men after I ordered a retreat, Adrian said. I will not allow his final words to become entertainment for wedding guests. Pain lived beneath his anger. Clara saw it clearly. Survivor's guilt hardened into duty, because duty was easier to endure than grief. She lowered the letter. I am not questioning Nathaniel's honor. Then let the matter rest. For today, Clara replied. Something colder than anger entered Adrian's eyes. He had expected gratitude, obedience, perhaps quiet dependence. He had not expected his inconvenient bride to challenge the foundation of their marriage before the wedding cake was cut. Percival rescued the table with a toast to Nathaniel's bravery. Conversation gradually resumed, but Clara no longer heard it. She slipped the envelope into her reticule and felt a small, hard object caught beneath its inner fold. When she drew it out beneath the table, she found a narrow strip of blue ribbon. Nathaniel had used blue ribbon to bind military accounts and confidential correspondence. Before leaving for France, he had told Clara never to trust a document tied with it unless the two cut ends matched. These ends did not. One had been cut cleanly with scissors, the other was jagged, as though torn from a longer bundle. Someone had separated Nathaniel's final letter from another document. Across the table, Percival watched her close her fingers around the ribbon. His smile remained courteous. His eyes did not. At that moment, Clara understood that her marriage had not merely fulfilled her brother's final request. It had completed a plan someone had begun before Nathaniel died. Percival's gaze remained fixed upon Clara's closed hand until a servant stepped between them to refill the wine. She slipped the blue ribbon into her reticule. Adrian resumed his seat, but the distance between them had changed. Before the wedding, he had treated Clara as a responsibility inherited from a dead friend. Now he watched her as though she might become a threat to the orderly life he had designed for them. The wedding breakfast ended shortly after 4. Guests departed beneath a pale autumn sky, while servants carried gifts into the eastern drawing room. Adrian escorted Clara upstairs to the suite prepared for her. The rooms were beautiful and impersonal. A fire burned beneath a carved marble mantel. New gowns filled the wardrobe, and jewels selected by the family solicitor rested inside a velvet case. Every comfort Adrian had promised was present. Nothing suggested that he knew the woman who would live there. These rooms connect to the library, he said. The west corridor leads to the chapel and gardens. My secretary will provide whatever funds you require, and the household accounts. Mrs. Hargrove manages domestic expenses. What about the estate ledgers? My uncle supervises them. Clara removed her gloves. I would like to examine the Vale accounts incorporated into our settlement. There is no need. Percival reviewed them before the wedding. That is precisely why I wish to see them. Adrian turned from the window. You accused my uncle of interfering with Nathaniel's letter in front of our guests. I said the letter had been opened and cut. Both are facts. You implied he was responsible. He was the only person at that table who admitted possessing it before you. Adrian's jaw tightened. My uncle protected Blackwood while I was at war. He negotiated with creditors after my father's death and restored our political standing. I will not repay that loyalty with suspicion because a ribbon was cut unevenly. Then do not suspect him. Verify him. My marriage will not begin with an investigation into my family. Clara met his gaze. Our marriage began with a document someone altered. For several seconds, neither moved. Adrian finally placed a ring of keys on the table. These open your rooms, the gardens, and the eastern entrance. The estate offices remain under my authority. The limitation was deliberate. Clara looked at the keys but did not pick them up. I will not enter your office without permission, but anything involving Vale property, my settlement, or the families living upon my land remains my concern. Your land is now protected by the marriage settlement. Protected is not the same as erased. Adrian's expression cooled. You have been Duchess of Blackwood for less than an hour, and I was Clara Vale for 32 years before that. He left without another word. Clara waited until the connecting door closed before allowing herself to sit. Her back remained straight, but her hands shook as she opened her reticule. She hated that part of herself, the small, wounded voice insisting Adrian's rejection mattered, because she had secretly hoped his proposal contained something more than obligation. She silenced it by placing Nathaniel's letter and the ribbon on the writing desk. Work had always been safer than hope. Clara spent the next hour studying the paper. Her father had taught both children to manage rents and correspondence, after illness confined him to his chair. Nathaniel preferred horses and fencing, so Clara eventually maintained the Vale ledgers herself. She knew his habits as intimately as other sisters knew a brother's laugh. Nathaniel wrote the date before the address. He blotted his signature, once, never twice. When discussing money, he placed a small dot beneath every pound symbol to prevent figures from being altered. The final letter contained none of those habits. A knock sounded. An elderly housekeeper entered carrying a tray. "Mrs. Hargrove, Your Grace, I thought you might prefer tea to another hour of congratulations." Clara liked her immediately. "Did you know my brother?" Only by reputation. Captain Vale persuaded his Grace to repair the southern cottages after the fever outbreak. Clara looked up. "Adrian told me the repairs were his uncle's recommendation." Mrs. Hargrove hesitated. "Perhaps Lord Percival approved the expense." Captain Vale brought the conditions to his Grace's attention. Another contribution had already been reassigned. Clara invited the housekeeper to sit and asked about the estate. Mrs. Hargrove declined the chair, but answered carefully. Tenant rents had increased twice. Winter coal allowances had been reduced, and several military widows had stopped receiving quarterly payments. "How many?" 23, at last count. Clara crossed to the desk. "May I see the household relief book?" "That record belongs to the estate office. Bring me the kitchen expense book instead. Coal, bread, and medicine given to tenants must appear somewhere." Mrs. Hargrove's eyes brightened. Within half an hour, the book lay open between them. Clara compared weekly purchases with the number of people supported by Blackwood charity funds. The kitchens were feeding almost twice as many families as Percival's official reports acknowledged. The payments had stopped, but the need had not. A particular name appeared repeatedly: Mrs. Edith Moore, widow of Sergeant Daniel Moore. Clara remembered Nathaniel mentioning the sergeant in letters from Spain. Daniel had carried Adrian from a collapsed stable after an artillery strike. Why is his widow receiving food from the servants rather than the military fund? Her pension was revoked, Mrs. Hargrove said. The official register claims Sergeant Moore deserted before his death. That is impossible. Nathaniel witnessed him die. Clara examined the date beside the revocation. The order had been issued 3 weeks after Nathaniel's death. Someone was removing witnesses and their families from the accounts. The following morning, Clara used her eastern entrance key and walked to the lower village. Mrs. Moore lived in a cottage with a broken roof and 2 young granddaughters. The widow tried to curtsy, but Clara caught her hands. "Did my brother ever leave papers with your husband?" Mrs. Moore's face lost its colour. Captain Vale sent Daniel a packet before the final campaign. Lord Percival's men came for it after both were dead. "Did they find it?" "No." Mrs. Moore moved to the hearth and lifted a loose brick. From behind it, she withdrew a narrow ledger wrapped in oilcloth. Before Clara could open it, horses stopped outside. Adrian entered the cottage with Percival behind him. His attention fell upon the hidden ledger in Clara's hands. "My uncle tells me you removed confidential estate records," he said. "I removed nothing. Mrs. Moore has just given me this." Percival looked at the widow. "Possession of stolen financial documents is a serious offence." Clara stepped between him and Mrs. Moore. "No one will threaten this family in my presence." Adrian stared at her. "You gave me your word that you would not interfere with estate administration." "I promised not to enter your office. I did not promise to ignore hungry people." She opened the ledger. Most pages recorded payments to soldiers' families. The final entry bore Nathaniel's name and a sum of £500 supposedly paid to him 2 days after he died. Beneath the amount appeared his signature. This time, the pound symbol contained the small, identifying dot Nathaniel always used. The signature was genuine, but a dead man could not have received the money. Clara raised her eyes to Percival. "Your official accounts say Nathaniel never handled this fund. This ledger says he did." Percival's hand moved toward the book. Clara pulled it beyond his reach, and for the first time, Adrian looked at his uncle with doubt. Percival's hand remained suspended above the ledger. Adrian noticed the movement. Why were £500 entered under Nathaniel's name after his death? He asked. Percival slowly lowered his arm, because the payment was probably authorized before his final campaign and recorded after confirmation reached England. Then Nathaniel did not receive it, Clara said. Someone else did. Mrs. Moore stood beside the hearth, twisting her apron between her fingers. Percival's presence frightened her more than the accusation of theft. Clara closed the ledger and placed it beneath one arm. Percival's voice hardened. That book belongs to the Blackwood Military Fund. It was entrusted to Sergeant Moore by a man who possessed no authority to remove it. Nathaniel helped supervise the fund. According to whom? According to the entries bearing his genuine marks. Percival turned to Adrian with the patience of a man addressing an unreasonable child. Your wife has mistaken an internal accounting record for evidence of theft. Give me the ledger, and I will have the matter properly examined. Adrian looked at Clara. She could see his conflict. The altered letter and impossible payment disturbed him, but trusting her would mean questioning the uncle who had governed his affairs for nearly a decade. Make a copy, Adrian told her. The original returns to the estate office. Percival's eyes narrowed. Clara considered refusing. Instead, she carried the ledger to Mrs. Moore's table and copied the relevant entries herself. Beside each one, she recorded its page number, ink color, handwriting, and condition. When she finished, she asked Mrs. Moore and Adrian to sign beneath her notes as witnesses. Percival did not offer his signature. Back at Blackwood Hall, he locked the original ledger inside the estate archive. Within the hour, Adrian signed an order, granting him exclusive control over all military fund records until the discrepancy was resolved. Clara learned of the order from Mrs. Hargrove. He has removed 3 boxes from the archive, the housekeeper whispered. They were loaded into a carriage bound for London. The authority created by Adrian's distrust had already allowed Percival to move the evidence beyond Clara's reach. She did not confront her husband immediately. Instead, she returned to her copied entries. The payments followed a pattern. Every 3 months, money was issued under the names of officers who had recently died overseas. The sums were large enough to matter, but small enough to disappear among burial expenses, pensions, and delayed military accounts. Nathaniel must have discovered the pattern shortly before his death. Clara needed access to the official pension register, but Percival controlled it. The kitchen book offered another route. For 2 days, she and Mrs. Hargrove compared food deliveries with the names of families receiving assistance. 23 widows officially removed from the military fund were still being fed from household supplies. 9 had husbands who served in Nathaniel and Adrian's regiment. Clara visited each family. Some were too frightened to speak. Others gave her letters confirming their husbands had died in service, not deserted as the revised records claimed. Mrs. Moore agreed to accompany Clara to the county magistrate. Her testimony forced the local overseer to suspend 3 pending evictions until the military register could be examined. It was a limited victory, but that evening 12 families still possessed their homes because Clara had acted. Adrian found her in the library surrounded by copied names. You went to the magistrate without consulting me. I went because your uncle issued eviction notices in your name. He says the families failed to prove their eligibility. They possess death notices signed by officers in your regiment. Adrian picked up one of the letters. The paper was creased and faded. Sergeant Moore's death had been confirmed by Nathaniel and countersigned by Adrian himself. I remember this, he said. Then why does your official register call him a deserter? I do not know. Ask the person controlling the register. Adrian placed the letter down. Percival believes clerical errors occurred when the War Office transferred the records. 23 errors, all benefiting the same private account? You have not proven that. No. Your order allowed him to take the original records before I could. Regret flickered across Adrian's face, but pride smothered it. I gave him control to prevent accusations from spreading before we understood the facts. Secrecy does not prevent corruption. It protects it. A servant interrupted them with a message. Percival had invited representatives from the Northern Counties Bank to inspect the estate's finances the following week. Their approval was essential to extending a loan against Blackwood's unentailed lands. He arranged that meeting months ago, Adrian said. And now he controls the documents they will inspect. Adrian's silence told Clara he understood the danger. Yet he still answered, "My uncle saved this estate once." Clara gathered her papers. Perhaps he saved it for himself. The next morning, Percival arrived with Miss Lydia Harcourt, the wealthy daughter of a banking director. She was not Adrian's mistress, but her father's approval could decide whether Blackwood survived its debts. Percival announced that Lydia would help reorganize the household charities and determine which families deserved assistance. Clara immediately understood the maneuver. Percival intended to replace her with a more obedient woman, while using Lydia's presence to secure the bank. During their first review, Lydia rejected Mrs. Moore's petition because its binding ribbon did not match official military correspondence. "It was tied with this when Captain Vale delivered it," Mrs. Moore insisted. The ribbon was blue. Clara examined its ends. One was cleanly cut. The other was jagged, exactly like the strip hidden inside Nathaniel's final letter. She placed the two pieces together. The torn fibers matched. The ribbon from Nathaniel's altered letter had once been attached to Sergeant Moore's packet. Adrian saw the join. "That could be coincidence," Percival said quickly. "Military offices used thousands of blue ribbons." Clara turned the joined pieces over. A tiny black stain crossed both halves in an unbroken diagonal line. Not coincidence. Nathaniel's letter and Moore's documents had been bound together before someone separated them. Adrian touched the stain. "Why would Nathaniel send these records with his final letter?" "To ensure you investigated them after his death," Clara answered. Percival rose from the table. For the first time, his polished courtesy disappeared completely. "Your Grace, your wife, is manufacturing scandal from scraps of cloth because she cannot tolerate having no place in matters beyond her understanding." Clara looked directly at him. "My brother hid evidence inside the request that brought me into this family. That gives me a place, whether you approve or not." Percival said nothing more. But later that evening, from her bedroom window, Clara saw him speaking to a rider beside the eastern gate. He handed the man a letter and pointed toward the village. The rider departed along the road leading to Mrs. Moore's cottage. Percival no longer regarded Clara as an inconvenient bride. He regarded her as the one person capable of destroying him. Clara left her bedroom before the rider cleared the eastern gate. She found Mrs. Hargrove supervising the removal of the wedding silver from the dining room. "Send a stable boy to Mrs. Moore's cottage by the lower path," Clara said. "Tell her to leave through the kitchen and bring both children to the schoolhouse." The housekeeper did not question the urgency. Clara exchanged her evening slippers for walking boots and slipped through the garden entrance. Rain had begun falling over Blackwood's fields, turning the narrow path into mud. She reached the schoolhouse shortly before Mrs. Moore arrived with her granddaughters. "What has happened?" the widow asked. "Percival sent a rider toward your cottage." Mrs. Moore clutched the youngest child closer. "The packet. Did Nathaniel leave anything besides the ledger?" The widow looked toward the dark windows. "Daniel received a letter 2 weeks before the captain died. He told me to hide it if any Blackwood servant came asking questions." "Where is it?" "Inside the cottage wall." Clara could not retrieve it while Percival's man searched the house. She needed to know whether the rider had come to steal evidence, threaten the family, or create something more damaging. She asked Mrs. Hargrove's stable boy to fetch the village constable. Then she returned alone by the woodland path and approached the cottage from behind. Light moved across the upper window. The rider was inside. Clara crouched beneath the kitchen sill and heard drawers being opened. A second man entered through the front door, carrying a small leather case. "Find the letter," he said. "Lord Percival wants the place burning before midnight." If the cottage were destroyed, the official story would be simple. Mrs. Moore had burned her own home while hiding stolen documents. Her testimony would be discredited, and the other widows would be frightened into silence. Clara saw a dark stream spreading beneath the kitchen door. Lamp oil. She crossed the yard and lifted the iron cover from the rain barrel. The barrel was too heavy to overturn, but a narrow wooden peg sealed its lower drainage hole. Clara pulled it free. Water rushed across the ground and entered the cottage through the uneven kitchen stones. Inside, one man cursed as the oil began floating away from the hearth. Clara struck the back door with a fallen branch. "The constable is coming." The rider ran through the front entrance. His companion followed, leaving the leather case behind. They mounted one horse and disappeared toward the northern woods, moments before the constable arrived. The case contained sealing wax, blank eviction notices, and a metal stamp reproducing Adrian's signature. Clara did not touch the stamp. She asked the constable to wrap the entire case in cloth and record where it had been found. Only after the evidence was secured did Mrs. Moore return to the cottage. She removed a loose stone from the wall beside her bed and withdrew Nathaniel's letter. The outer sheet had suffered from damp, but the writing remained legible. Nathaniel described irregular withdrawals from the military fund. He had traced several payments to a private account controlled by the manager of Blackwood's northern estates. Before he could name that manager, the letter ended. The missing second sheet had been torn away. At the bottom, Nathaniel had drawn a small square divided by 2 diagonal lines. Clara recognized it as his childhood shorthand for a ledger stored inside another book. "Did Daniel understand the symbol?" she asked. He said the captain had hidden a complete account where no gentleman would think to look. Clara glanced toward the cottage's few books. Most were prayer volumes and collections of sermons. Mrs. Moore lifted a thick household manual from beneath the bed. Nathaniel's handwriting filled the margins beside recipes, cleaning instructions, and remedies. He had disguised financial calculations as quantities of flour, salt, candles, and coal. Clara spent the remaining hours before dawn decoding them. The withdrawals totaled more than £16,000. The fund had not failed through clerical incompetence. Someone had stolen from it systematically for 7 years. A final notation referred to 3 bonds scheduled for payment through the Northern Counties Bank. If honoured, those bonds would transfer a substantial portion of Blackwood's unentailed land to an unnamed creditor. The payment was due in 4 days. Clara returned to the hall as breakfast was being served. Adrian and Percival were waiting in the morning room. Percival held one of the forged eviction notices. "My nephew's signature was found in a widow's cottage, alongside stolen estate documents," he said. "Your interference has now created the appearance that His Grace personally authorized illegal removals." The signature was produced with a metal stamp. "According to a constable whose wife receives food from the Blackwood kitchens." Adrian looked exhausted. "Did you enter the cottage before the constable arrived?" "I remained outside until the men fled." "You confronted armed intruders alone?" "I prevented them from burning the house." Anger crossed his face, but it was rooted in fear. "You might have been killed. Would that have made your uncle's explanation more convenient?" Percival placed both hands upon the table. "This has gone far enough. Lady Blackwood manufactures danger, then presents herself as the only person capable of solving it. Her actions threaten the bank negotiations and your family's name." Clara took out Nathaniel's household manual. This contains 7 years of withdrawals from the military fund. It also identifies 3 suspicious bonds due for payment through Miss Harcourt's father's bank. Lydia Harcourt had entered, unnoticed, behind them. "My father's bank does not issue fraudulent bonds," she said. "I did not say it issued them. I believe someone intends to use the bank to make them appear legitimate." Lydia examined Nathaniel's calculations. She recognized the bond numbers and confirmed that all 3 were scheduled to clear in 4 days. Percival immediately claimed credit for discovering the danger. "I invited the bank precisely because I suspected irregularities," he said. "Lady Blackwood found only what my review was designed to uncover." Adrian turned to Clara. "Can you prove Nathaniel wrote these calculations before his death?" "The ink, handwriting, and paper can be examined. More importantly, the withdrawal dates correspond with the kitchen accounts and the names removed from the pension register." Percival shook his head. "Copies prepared under her supervision. The original pension book remains inside your archive," Clara said. "Let Adrian compare it himself." Silence settled over the room. The evidence was within the house. Adrian needed only to unlock the archive, place the books beside each other, and verify whether Clara's calculations matched the original entries. Percival stepped closer to his nephew. "The bank representatives arrive tomorrow. Opening sealed records now will suggest we expect to find fraud. The loan could collapse before we defend ourselves." Clara placed Nathaniel's manual in front of Adrian. "You have 1 day before Percival presents selected accounts to the bank, and 4 days before those bonds are paid. Examine the original ledger today." Adrian looked from his wife to the uncle who had governed his inheritance. Once again, he had been given a clear opportunity to discover the truth. This time, everyone in the room was waiting to see whether he would take it. Adrian lifted Nathaniel's household manual from the table. For one hopeful moment, Clara believed he had chosen to verify the evidence. Then Percival spoke. If you open the archive before the bank's representatives arrive, they will assume the estate records have been compromised. The records may already be compromised, Adrian said. And if they are not, Blackwood loses its loan because your new wife has interpreted recipes as financial codes. Clara watched Adrian's fingers tighten around the book. Give me the archive key, he said. Percival did not move. You entrusted the investigation to me. I am taking responsibility for it now. The two men stared at each other. Lydia Harcourt remained near the door, clearly uncomfortable with the argument unfolding around her father's bank. At last, Percival reached inside his coat. Instead of producing a key, he placed a folded document on the table. This arrived from London an hour ago. It was a notice from the Northern Counties Bank. Unless Blackwood provided verified accounts before noon the following day, the bank would reject its loan application and demand immediate payment of an existing debt. Adrian read the amount twice. Without the loan, servants would lose their positions, tenants would face increased rents, and several unentailed properties would be sold within weeks. Percival lowered his voice. Let me complete the presentation we have prepared. Once the loan is secured, we can examine every accusation privately. Cast S. By then, the bonds may already have been accepted, Clara said. They are not due for 4 days. 4 days gives you time to destroy the records. Percival's expression hardened. You accuse easily for a woman whose own family accounts collapsed beneath unexplained debt. Clara felt the blow but refused to show it. My family's debts began after Nathaniel discovered money missing from your fund. Or perhaps Nathaniel took it. Adrian rose so abruptly that his chair struck the floor. Do not accuse him. I am attempting to protect his memory, Percival replied. But we must consider the possibility that Lady Blackwood's brother concealed losses and left her to secure a wealthy marriage. Clara looked at Adrian. My brother returned to enemy fire because you ordered a retreat. Do you truly believe he stole from the widows of the men he died beside? No, Adrian said immediately, but the word was followed by silence. Percival used it. Then allow the bank to confirm the figures. Give me authority to act without further interference until the review is complete. He placed a second document beside the notice. It granted him exclusive control over the Blackwood Military Fund, its archives, the Vale-related accounts, and all negotiations with the Northern Counties Bank. It also prohibited Clara from removing, copying, or examining financial records during the investigation. Adrian read the first page. Clara stepped closer. If you sign that, he can classify Nathaniel's manual as stolen property. He can accuse Mrs. Moore of concealing estate records and prevent every widow from testifying. It is temporary, Adrian said. Authority is never temporary when given to someone who controls the evidence. The bank deadline is tomorrow, and the truth will still be true tomorrow. That truth will not protect 600 tenants if the estate collapses today. Clara heard the reasoning beneath his words. Adrian was not choosing Percival because he had disproved her evidence. He was choosing the promise of financial security because investigating his uncle required accepting that Blackwood had been corrupted under his own authority. Have the archive brought here, she said. You do not need to delay the bank. Give me 1 hour with the original ledger in the presence of witnesses. Percival laughed softly. And permit a suspected thief to handle the accounts? Adrian looked sharply at him. Suspected by whom? Percival opened the morning room doors. Several guests were waiting in the adjoining gallery. Among them stood the county magistrate, 2 bank representatives, and families from neighbouring estates. A formal financial reception had apparently been arranged without Clara's knowledge. Percival addressed them before Adrian could intervene. I regret that a private family matter has become relevant to today's negotiations. Her Grace has been found in possession of confidential records removed from the Blackwood archive. A murmur travelled through the gallery. Clara felt the trap close. Percival presented a letter bearing her signature. It instructed Nathaniel to conceal military fund documents and promised that once she married Adrian, she would gain access to the Blackwood fortune. The handwriting was remarkably accurate. The content was entirely false. I did not write this. Percival handed the letter to Adrian. It was recovered from Captain Vale's effects. Clara examined the date. The letter had supposedly been written 6 months before Nathaniel's death, when Adrian was already serving beside him in France. Percival wanted the guests to believe she had planned the marriage before her brother died. "Compare the paper with my personal stationery," she said. "Check the watermark." "The guests did not come to observe a domestic trial," Adrian said. Percival lowered his voice, but everyone could hear him. "They came to decide whether your estate remains worthy of trust. You must choose whose conduct represents Blackwood." Clara held Nathaniel's manual against her chest. "Ask him for the archive key." Adrian looked at Percival. "Give it to me." Percival's expression changed into carefully measured regret. "I cannot." "Why?" "Because 3 original ledgers disappeared last night. A servant saw Her Grace leaving the eastern entrance shortly before they were taken." Clara understood at once. The records removed days earlier had now been declared missing, and her journey to protect Mrs. Moore had provided the necessary opportunity. The magistrate stepped forward. "Until those ledgers are recovered, the household manual must be secured as potential evidence." He reached for Nathaniel's book. "Clara did not release it. Once I surrender this, it will disappear with the others." Adrian stood between them. For a moment, Clara thought he would defend her. Instead, he held out his hand. "Give me the book. Will you keep it yourself? I will place it in the archive. Percival controls the archive. Clara, do not force me to take it from you." The humiliation was worse because it occurred before witnesses. Her husband was not confused or deceived beyond reason. He had seen the altered seal, the matching ribbon, the impossible payment, and the forged signature stamp. He still chose the easier loyalty. Clara gave him the manual. Adrian passed it to Percival. Then he signed the document, granting his uncle complete authority. The stroke of the pen was quiet, yet it destroyed every protection Clara had tried to build. Percival turned immediately to the magistrate. "Under the authority granted by His Grace, I request that Lady Blackwood be prohibited from accessing estate property while the missing records are investigated." Adrian's face changed. "That was not part of our agreement. It is necessary to protect you." Percival then announced that Clara would reside at Briar House, an isolated Blackwood property, until the investigation ended. Clara looked at her husband. "You could have examined the evidence. Instead, you gave him the power to call truth a crime." "I will resolve this," Adrian said. "No, you have chosen how it will be resolved." She removed her wedding ring and placed it upon the document beside his still wet signature. "You married me because you believed you owed my brother a debt. Today, you used me to pay for your pride." Clara refused the carriage prepared for Briar House. She left Blackwood Hall through the front doors with Mrs. Moore beside her and the entire county watching. By sunset, Nathaniel's manual had vanished from the archive, and every widow who had spoken to Clara received an eviction order bearing Adrian's name. Clara did not look back at Blackwood Hall. Mrs. Moore walked beside her along the rain-darkened road, carrying a small valise and holding her granddaughters by the hands. Behind them came 9 other military widows who had received eviction notices before sunset. None possessed enough money for an inn. Clara led them toward the abandoned schoolhouse. The building had no firewood, bedding, or unbroken windows, but its roof remained sound. Mrs. Hargrove arrived after nightfall with blankets and food taken from her personal stores. "Lord Percival dismissed me," the housekeeper said. "He accused me of helping you steal the ledgers. I am sorry. I am not. I served Blackwood for 27 years. Today was the first time I felt ashamed of it." The following morning, Clara sent messages to Mr. Samuel Finch, her family's elderly solicitor, and every widow named in her copied accounts. She no longer possessed Nathaniel's manual or the original pension book, but Percival had overlooked the notes she had made during her first night at Blackwood Hall. Names, dates, and amounts were enough to begin. By noon, disaster reached the estate. The Northern Counties Bank rejected Blackwood's loan after discovering 3 fraudulent bonds among Percival's documents. Instead of quietly delaying payment, the bank notified the Crown because the securities carried military fund seals. Government officers froze Adrian's accounts. Creditors seized the estate's wool revenue before tenant wages could be paid. Merchants refused further deliveries, and the coal supplier stopped every wagon bound for Blackwood villages. The servants who had watched Clara leave in silence now faced dismissal themselves. Adrian rode to the schoolhouse before dusk. His coat was wet, and the exhaustion in his face made him look older than 36. "You were right about the bonds." Clara continued arranging blankets along the wall. "What happened to Nathaniel's manual?" Percival claims it was stolen after I placed it in the archive. You placed it in his hands. I know. Do you? Adrian absorbed the question without defending himself. The Crown believes I authorized the fraudulent securities. My signature appears on the transfer documents and the orders removing the widows. You did authorize Percival to act in your name. I did not authorize theft, but your signature gave him the power required to commit it. Adrian looked around the schoolhouse. More than 30 women and children now sheltered there. Some had husbands or fathers who once served under his command. I revoked the eviction orders, he said. No one accepted your revocation. His surprise revealed that he still did not understand the authority he had surrendered. Clara showed him one of the notices. Beneath his printed signature appeared a clause declaring that all decisions made during the financial review could be reversed only by the appointed administrator. Percival was that administrator. Then I will remove him. You cannot. The bank and magistrate witnessed your appointment. Until the investigation ends, attempting to dismiss him would look like interference with evidence. Adrian read the clause again. He had signed away his ability to protect the people carrying his family name upon their eviction notices. A rider arrived before he could answer. A notice from London summoned Adrian before a parliamentary committee. His military charity position had been suspended, and creditors intended to petition for control of Blackwood's unentailed properties. The political standing he hoped to preserve by sacrificing Clara had begun collapsing because of that sacrifice. What will happen to the tenants? He asked. Percival will use the frozen accounts as proof the estate cannot support them. He will then sell their leases or raise rents. You sound certain, because Nathaniel predicted it. Clara spread her copied figures across a school desk. The missing payments did not disappear randomly. Every withdrawal occurred shortly before Percival purchased land through intermediaries. He had used military fund money to acquire debts connected to Blackwood. Once Adrian defaulted, Percival could exchange those debts for property. He was not merely stealing, Clara said. He was buying the right to dismantle your estate. Adrian leaned over the calculations. Can you prove this? Not without the original ledgers. Then we recover them. We? I will help you. Clara folded the papers. I will protect the widows and clear Nathaniel's name. If doing so exposes Percival, you may benefit. But I will not conduct this investigation to rescue you from the consequences of your decision. Pain crossed his face. I deserve that. This is not punishment, Adrian. It is a boundary. Before leaving, he placed a purse on the desk. Clara pushed it back. Money from frozen Blackwood accounts can be seized and used to accuse these women of receiving stolen funds. It is my private money. Nothing remains private while your finances are under investigation. For the first time, Adrian looked entirely powerless. Clara watched him ride away alone. That evening, Mr. Finch arrived in a modest carriage filled with coal, flour, and legal documents. He had served Clara's father for 3 decades and greeted her without asking whether society considered her guilty. The Vale marriage settlement preserved more than Lord Percival realized, he said. A small parcel of land near the southern river remained in a trust established by Clara's mother. Its income belonged to Clara independently and could not be controlled by Adrian or Percival. It was not enough to restore the military fund, but it gave Clara a legal base outside Blackwood authority. She used the first payment to rent an empty coaching house where the displaced families could live and work. By the 3rd day, the old building had become a temporary office. Mrs. Hargrove organized food, Mrs. Moore recorded testimony, and the older children copied names from Clara's surviving notes. Clara examined the forged bonds again using copies supplied by Lydia Harcourt. Each carried a legitimate military seal, but the numbers contained a subtle pattern. Nathaniel had hidden his warnings as household quantities. Percival had hidden transfers inside bond numbers. Every 4th digit corresponded to a page and line in the official pension register. When Clara decoded them, they formed 3 words. North Archive Cellar. The missing ledgers had not been taken to London. They were still at Blackwood Hall. Before Clara could send word to Mr. Finch, Lydia arrived with more alarming news. Percival had scheduled an auction of the widow's cottages and Clara's former Vale home. The sale would occur in 48 hours. Once ownership changed, even proof of theft might not restore the properties without years of litigation. Clara looked at the women working around her. She could continue building her independent refuge and allow Adrian's estate to fall, or risk returning to the house from which he had publicly expelled her. Her choice had nothing to do with saving her husband. Those cottages belonged to families Percival intended to erase. "Find Captain Harrow at the county militia office," she told Lydia. "Tell him we need witnesses, lanterns, and authority to search a cellar." Outside, the Blackwood chapel bell began to ring. One stroke for every tenant property Percival had placed on the auction list. There were 112. Clara listened until the final bell faded. Then, she picked up the eastern entrance key Adrian had given her on their wedding day. She had less than 2 nights to prove the auction was built upon stolen money. Clara returned to Blackwood Hall after midnight. She did not enter as Adrian's wife. She entered as the beneficiary of the Vale Trust, accompanied by Mr. Finch, Captain Harrow, and 2 county constables carrying a magistrate's order. Adrian met them in the entrance hall. "You found the ledgers?" "We found a reference to the North Archive cellar. That room has been sealed since my father died." Then Percival assumed no one would connect it to current accounts. Adrian glanced at the eastern key in Clara's hand. "You could have entered without witnesses and allowed your uncle to claim I planted whatever we found." The answer reminded him how little his private belief now mattered. Clara needed evidence that would survive scrutiny, not another promise from the husband who had twice refused to examine it. Percival appeared at the top of the staircase wearing a dark robe over his nightclothes. "What is the meaning of this?" Captain Harrow displayed the search order. Percival read it and smiled. "The North Cellar contains family papers protected by privilege. Lady Blackwood has no authority to search them." Mr. Finch opened the Vale settlement. "She has the right to inspect any Blackwood record affecting property placed in her mother's trust. 3 scheduled auction lots overlap that land." Percival's smile disappeared. They proceeded through the archive corridor. The North Cellar door was secured by 2 locks. Percival claimed the keys had been lost years earlier, so Harrow authorized a constable to break them. Cold air rose from the stairs. Shelves filled the underground room, but most held rotting correspondence and abandoned household books. Clara walked between them with a lantern, searching for records created within the past 7 years. At first, she found nothing. Then she noticed that 3 shelves were unusually free of dust. Something stood here recently. Adrian examined the floor. Narrow wheel marks crossed the stone and ended beside a wine rack fixed against the wall. Together, the constables pulled it forward. Behind it was a second door. Percival turned toward the stairs. Captain Harrow blocked him. The hidden chamber contained the missing pension ledgers, bundles of eviction notices, and sealed packets of military documents. A small press stood in the corner beside a metal stamp, reproducing Adrian's signature. Clara did not touch anything. Mr. Finch numbered every object, while the constables recorded its position. Harrow sealed the room and assigned a guard before permitting the first ledger to be removed. The evidence would have documented custody from discovery to court. Percival's defense began immediately. Lady Blackwood knew of this cellar through her husband. She arranged everything before bringing witnesses. "I did not know this room existed," Adrian said. "Then your wife learned of it from Nathaniel. He was the thief, and she completed his work." Clara opened the earliest ledger. Nathaniel's notes appeared beside several withdrawals, but they did not authorize them. He had marked the entries with tiny crosses and written questions in the margins. The answers had been added later in another hand. Clara compared the figures with the kitchen accounts, the forged bond numbers, and the testimony collected from the widows. Every trail led to the same private account. Mr. Finch identified its owner, Percival Blackwood. Adrian stared at his uncle. "For 7 years? You inherited a bankrupt estate," Percival replied. "I did what was necessary to preserve it." "You stole from soldiers' families." "I redirected idle money into land. They were pensions. They were sentimental promises made by men who understood nothing about finance." Clara saw Captain Harrow's hand tighten around his sword. Percival quickly changed his argument. "Those purchases increased the value of Blackwood property. Your Grace benefited from every transaction." The implication was clear. If Adrian exposed him, Percival would claim the Duke knowingly shared in the theft. Adrian looked at Clara. She offered him no answer. This was his decision to make, without asking her to carry its moral cost. "Seal everything," he told Harrow. "My uncle will face the magistrate." Percival's expression became almost pitying. You cannot afford honesty. The estate collapses if those accounts are frozen. Then it collapses. It was the first costly choice Adrian had made, without requiring Clara to absorb the consequences. Percival was placed under guard in his rooms, while the ledgers were transferred to the coaching house. Clara selected only 3 volumes necessary to stop the auction. Each was wrapped, sealed by Harrow, and entered into his custody record. Before dawn, Adrian visited Clara's temporary office. He found 40 women organizing documents at long tables. Older children folded blankets, while Mrs. Hargrove calculated food supplies. A sign near the door offered assistance to any military family removed from the official register. "You built this in 3 days," he said. "They built it. I gave them a room." Mrs. Moore placed a stack of receipts before Clara. Adrian recognized several amounts. These payments came from the Vale textile leases. "Yes, you have been supporting the widows since before our marriage. Nathaniel and I began after the winter fever." Adrian looked through the names. Some belonged to soldiers he had personally commanded. He had believed Percival's reports that their families were adequately supported, while Clara quietly paid for medicine, coal, and rent from her shrinking inheritance. "I called your accounts evidence of greed." "You did. I thought you wanted access to Blackwood's fortune. I wanted access to the records proving its obligations." He lowered his voice. "What do you require from me now? Tomorrow, the creditors will argue the auction should proceed because stopping it damages innocent lenders. You will testify that Percival acted under authority you willingly gave him. That may make me legally responsible for every fraudulent transaction." "Yes." Adrian accepted the condition. "And after that?" "There is no after that between us until the families are safe. Nathaniel's name is cleared and my property is beyond Blackwood control." He nodded. "I understand." Clara could not tell whether he truly did, but he did not ask for forgiveness. At noon, Captain Harrow returned to inspect the sealed ledgers. The guard assigned to the evidence room was unconscious. The door remained locked. Its wax seal appeared undamaged. Inside, all 3 ledgers were gone. In their place lay Nathaniel's household manual. The book Percival claimed had vanished from the Blackwood archive. Its final pages had been covered with fresh writing in Clara's hand. The forged entries appeared to show that she and Nathaniel had planned the theft together. A window stood open above the alley. Across the road, Percival was climbing into a waiting carriage. Someone inside Blackwood Hall had released him, copied Clara's handwriting, and delivered the false evidence into a room no one seemed to have entered. The carriage disappeared toward London with the original ledgers. On the table, beneath the forged confession, Percival had left the printed announcement for the following day's auction. At the bottom was a new notice. "Lady Clara Blackwood will be arrested at noon for conspiracy, fraud, and theft from the widows she claims to protect." Captain Harrow lifted Nathaniel's household manual without opening it further. "No one touches this until the magistrate examines the room." Clara stood beside the open window. The alley below was too narrow for a carriage, which meant Percival had not removed the ledgers that way. The open window existed only to create the appearance of an escape route. "The thief entered through the door," she said. "The seal was intact," Harrow replied. "It appeared intact." Clara bent toward the dark red wax. The impression matched Harrow's signet, but the surface was smoother than the seal he had applied at Blackwood Hall. Someone had made a mold of his ring and replaced the original wax after unlocking the room. Percival still had an accomplice inside the investigation. Harrow ordered every entrance guarded, but the approaching arrest warrant left Clara little time. If she fled, Percival would call it proof of guilt. If she remained, he could imprison her before the auction and silence the widows through fear. "I will stay," she said. Adrian entered moments later, having followed Percival's carriage from Blackwood Hall. "I lost him at the London road." Clara pointed toward the forged manual. "He did not need to carry the ledgers personally. Someone replaced them while we were examining the accounts." Adrian read several lines. The imitation of Clara's handwriting was nearly perfect. It claimed Nathaniel had created false pensioners, diverted payments, and instructed Clara to marry Adrian if the fraud were ever discovered. "He has turned every act of assistance into evidence of theft," Adrian said, "because he knows charitable payments are difficult to prove once the recipients are frightened or removed." Mrs. Moore entered with alarming news. 2 widows had already withdrawn their testimony after men threatened to place their children in parish care. Others were preparing to leave before the arrest. Clara gathered everyone in the main room. "If you remain, Percival may attack your reputations and livelihoods. I will not demand courage from people whose children bear the risk." No one moved at first. Then one woman collected her coat. 3 others followed. Clara did not condemn them. Fear was precisely the weapon Percival understood best. By morning, only 12 of the original families remained. The magistrate arrived at 11 with 6 constables and the warrant for Clara's arrest. He examined the replaced seal, but refused to delay. "Lord Percival has submitted evidence showing that Lady Blackwood created fraudulent pension claims before her marriage. The man submitting it escaped lawful guard," Harrow said. "His solicitor claims he fled because the Duke threatened his life." Adrian stepped forward. "I ordered no such threat." The magistrate's face remained impassive. "The allegation will be investigated." Clara was permitted to attend the auction under guard because her mother's trust held a legal interest in 3 properties. The sale took place inside the county assembly hall. Creditors filled the front benches. Percival sat beside the auctioneer, no longer pretending to be merely the Duke's loyal advisor. He wore Nathaniel's signet ring. Clara saw the blue stone from across the room. "That belonged to my brother," she said. "Percival covered it with his glove. Captain Vale gave it to me as security for a private debt." The lie served 2 purposes. It implied Nathaniel had been financially desperate and allowed Percival to explain possessing a personal object connected to the forged documents. The auction began. One by one, cottages belonging to military families were offered to buyers linked to Percival's creditors. Clara's solicitor objected, but without the original ledgers, he could not prove the debts had been purchased using stolen money. The first cottage sold, then the second. Mrs. Moore gripped Clara's arm as her own home was announced. Adrian rose from the rear bench. "Before another property is sold, I request permission to address the creditors." Percival laughed. "The Duke's accounts are frozen. His opinion carries no financial value. My confession does." Adrian handed the magistrate a signed declaration. He admitted that Clara had shown him the altered seal, the matching ribbon, Nathaniel's coded accounts, and the forged signature stamp. He acknowledged that he had repeatedly refused to inspect original records. Finally, he stated that he had granted Percival exclusive authority despite knowing evidence connected him to missing funds. The room became utterly still. "If these transactions occurred through power I knowingly surrendered," Adrian said, "then the responsibility begins with me. Seize my unentailed properties before selling a single widow's home." Mr. Finch warned him quietly, "That declaration may cost you nearly everything not protected by the title. It should cost me before it costs them." The magistrate suspended the auction while the creditors reviewed Adrian's offer. Percival rose in fury. "This is the performance of a husband controlled by a calculating wife." "No," Adrian answered. "It is the testimony of a man who preferred his pride to the truth." His confession did not prove Clara innocent, but it prevented Percival from claiming Adrian had been entirely deceived by her. More importantly, the proposed seizure shifted the creditors' attention toward Adrian's valuable private land and away from the widow's cottages. The auctioneer reluctantly postponed the remaining sales for 24 hours. Percival still appeared to be winning. Clara remained under arrest. The original evidence was gone, and Nathaniel's name had been publicly stained. As constables escorted her from the hall, she looked again at the blue signet ring. Nathaniel had worn it on his left hand since childhood. Years earlier, he had cracked the stone while climbing the Vale Orchard wall. Clara remembered binding his bleeding finger, while he complained that the jeweler had placed the repaired stone backward. The hawk, engraved beneath the sapphire, faced toward the wearer rather than outward. Percival wore the ring on his right hand. Its hawk faced outward. It was not Nathaniel's original ring. It was a copy. Clara stopped walking. The ring had not been created merely to support Percival's false story. A reversed copy could press a correct-facing seal into wax. That explained how Nathaniel's apparently genuine marks had appeared on payments made after his death. Percival had revealed the tool used to forge the entire evidence chain, but accusing him would only make him remove the ring. She needed to force him to use it publicly. Clara leaned toward Mr. Finch as the constables placed her inside the prison carriage. Request an emergency hearing before tomorrow's auction. On what grounds? Tell the court that Nathaniel left a sealed codicil transferring the Vale Trust. There is no codicil. I know, Percival does not. Understanding entered the solicitor's eyes. If he believes such a document exists, he will produce a competing letter and seal it with Nathaniel's ring. Clara looked through the carriage window at Percival, standing on the assembly steps. He smiled, as though she had finally been defeated. She allowed him to believe it. By the following morning, he would be required to prove his claim before the creditors, the magistrate, and every widow whose home he intended to steal. To win, Percival would have to present one final lie, and Clara would make certain he sealed it in front of them all. Clara spent the night inside a locked room at the county courthouse. She did not sleep. By candlelight, she reconstructed the sequence of Percival's scheme from the evidence that remained available. Mr. Finch had retained her original notes. Mistress more possessed Nathaniel's first letter. Lydia Harcourt could authenticate the fraudulent bonds, while Mrs. Hargrove knew which widows had continued receiving food after their pensions disappeared. Each fact alone could be dismissed. Together, they formed a history Percival could not explain without exposing himself. Shortly before dawn, Captain Harrow visited Clara with news that the emergency hearing had been granted. The remaining auction would begin immediately afterward. Percival submitted an answer to Finch's claim, he said. He says Nathaniel transferred all Vale financial interest to him shortly before his death. Did he produce a document? A sealed letter. He refuses to open it until the hearing. The trap had worked. Clara gave Harrow precise instructions. The forged household manual must remain sealed until independent examiners inspected its ink. Mrs. Moore and her granddaughters required protection. Lydia was to remain at the bank until armed officers escorted her to court. Finally, every object presented during the hearing must be numbered and entered into a custody record before anyone touched it. Percival had built his defense through disappearing evidence. Clara would deny him that advantage. The assembly hall was filled before 9. Military families occupied the rear benches. Creditors sat near the front, impatient to resume the auction. Adrian stood alone beside Mr. Finch, stripped of the authority his title once gave him. He did not approach Clara when the constables brought her in. She had asked him not to. The magistrate opened the hearing by describing Clara as an accused woman, seeking to prevent the lawful sale of property through an alleged codicil no court had yet seen. Mr. Finch rose. The Vale Trust cannot be transferred through a private military letter. However, Lord Percival claims Captain Nathaniel Vale granted him an interest sufficient to authorize the disputed transactions. We therefore request examination of his evidence. Percival stepped forward holding a cream-coloured envelope. This letter proves Captain Vale discovered his sister's misuse of charitable funds. He transferred control to me so I could protect both families from scandal. He looked toward Clara. Lady Blackwood learned of his decision and constructed this accusation to recover what her brother denied her. It was a compelling lie because it turned Nathaniel's silence into proof Percival could define for himself. The clerk received the envelope with metal tongs and placed it on a white cloth. A blue wax seal bore the Vale Hawk above 3 waves. Clara asked that the letter remain unopened temporarily. If Lord Percival received it before Nathaniel's death, he must be able to describe when and how it arrived. Percival claimed a military courier delivered it to his London residence on October 9th. Captain Harrow produced army dispatch records. No official courier had travelled from Nathaniel's regiment to London between October 5th and October 12th. Percival adjusted his account. It may have come through a private messenger. What was his name? I do not remember. Yet, you trusted an unidentified man carrying a document supposedly granting you control over thousands of pounds. Percival's counsel objected, but the magistrate allowed the question to stand. Clara then asked Percival when he first learned Nathaniel suspected irregularities in the military fund after receiving this letter. Then why did you order 3 account boxes removed from Blackwood's archive 6 weeks earlier? Mrs. Hargrove testified that she had seen the boxes loaded into Percival's carriage. A stable register confirmed the date. Percival claimed they contained unrelated estate records. Lydia Harcourt was called next. She presented the bank's original bond register, showing that the 3 fraudulent bonds had been submitted under Percival's authorization before Clara married Adrian. She could not have created them in revenge for losing control of the press or estate, Lydia said. At the time these bonds entered our system, she possessed no Blackwood authority. Percival attacked Lydia's credibility by suggesting she resented his failure to recommend a marriage between her and Adrian. Lydia did not react. My father's bank nearly authenticated stolen securities because I trusted your assurances. I am testifying to correct that failure. Clara presented the joined ribbon from Nathaniel's final letter and Mrs. Moore's packet. The black stain crossed both pieces without interruption. That proved the documents had once been bound together. Percival argued that Clara could have joined them after the wedding. Mrs. Moore produced Nathaniel's earlier letter. Its household book symbol corresponded with the hiding place of the coded manual, establishing that he had deliberately separated evidence among people he trusted. The magistrate ordered the forged household manual opened. 2 professional scriveners examined its final pages. The imitation handwriting appeared convincing, but its ink contained iron particles from a formula first manufactured 3 months after Nathaniel's death. Percival claimed Clara had added the entries recently. Clara answered, "Then why was the book found inside a room sealed under Captain Harrow's authority while I was surrounded by witnesses at Blackwood Hall?" Percival's counsel suggested one of Clara's supporters had placed it there. Harrow presented the copied impression from the false door seal. Its central crest faced the wrong direction, proving someone had used a reversed mold of his signet. The pattern mirrored the central accusation against Nathaniel. Every apparently genuine seal had been produced by a reversed copy. Adrian was called last. He confirmed that Percival had controlled the archives, estate correspondence, and military fund for 7 years. He authenticated his own signatures on the documents, granting Percival additional power. "You were manipulated by your wife after the marriage," Percival's counsel said. Adrian looked toward Clara, but did not ask her to rescue him. "My wife warned me before I signed. I saw evidence supporting her warning and chose not to investigate. Percival exploited my decision, but the decision was mine." The confession damaged his legal defense while strengthening Clara's case. It proved Percival possessed genuine authority and therefore had no need for Clara's cooperation to access records, seals, or funds. The magistrate finally ordered Percival's envelope opened. Inside was a letter bearing Nathaniel's handwriting. It accused Clara of falsifying pension claims and transferred control of the Vale Trust to Percival. A date appeared above the signature. October 7th, Clara requested Nathaniel's military record. On October 7th, he had been wounded in his right shoulder and could not hold a pen for 9 days. 3 officers had signed the medical entry. Percival's letter had supposedly been written in Nathaniel's steady right hand during that period. A murmur of disbelief travelled through the hall. Percival remained composed. "A wounded man may still write when necessity demands it." "Then let us examine the seal," Clara said. The blue wax on the envelope had been impressed with a perfect Vale crest. She asked the clerk to bring forward the ring Percival wore. His hand closed into a fist. "This is a personal possession. You testified yesterday that Nathaniel gave it to you as security for a debt. That makes it part of your evidence." The magistrate ordered him to surrender it. After a long silence, Percival removed the ring. Clara requested 3 items. Nathaniel's original childhood signet, held among the Vale family possessions, Percival's copy, and fresh wax. The original ring was brought from Mr. Finch's locked case. Its repaired blue stone sat backward, and the engraved hawk faced toward the wearer. Percival's copy faced outward. If both rings were pressed into wax, only one would reproduce the seal appearing on letters created after Nathaniel's death. The clerk heated 2 sticks of blue wax. Percival suddenly reached across the table and seized the forged letter. Captain Harrow caught his wrist before he could throw it into the brazier. The room erupted, but Clara remained still. Percival had just tried to destroy the evidence in front of creditors, officers, and the families he had robbed. The clerk poured the first pool of wax. He lifted Nathaniel's authentic ring and pressed it down. Then he reached for Percival's copy. One impression would expose an innocent man. The other would identify the instrument used to steal from the dead. Clara watched the clerk raise both seals toward the light. The clerk placed the 2 impressions beside Percival's sealed letter. Nathaniel's authentic ring produced a hawk facing left. Percival's copy produced a hawk facing right, the exact direction of the crest upon the letter, the altered military accounts, and the document that had brought Clara into her marriage. No one spoke. The magistrate examined the impressions twice before raising his eyes to Percival. This ring was used to forge Captain Vale's seal. Percival tore himself from Captain Harrow's grasp and reached for the brazier. Adrian intercepted him before he could destroy the letter. The two men struck the floor together. Percival fought with the desperation of someone who knew respectability had been the only shield separating him from prison. Harrow pulled him away and secured his wrists. "This proves nothing beyond possession of a copied ring," Percival said. "Lady Blackwood may have commissioned it." Clara approached the evidence table. The jeweller who copied it recorded every commission. Mr. Finch produced a receipt recovered from an account box in Percival's London office. It described a blue stone Vale signet, ordered 7 years earlier and paid for through the Blackwood Military Fund. That was when the first pension had disappeared. The complete scheme emerged through records, witnesses, and Percival's failed attempts to explain them. He had discovered that Nathaniel was examining the military fund and begun forging payments under the names of dead officers. Money intended for their families was diverted into private accounts used to purchase debts against Blackwood and Vale properties. When Nathaniel collected enough evidence to expose him, Percival intercepted the packet sent to Adrian. He separated Nathaniel's financial records from the final letter and altered the remaining message so Adrian would believe his friend had requested Clara's permanent protection through marriage. Percival had needed Clara inside Blackwood Hall. As Nathaniel's nearest relative, she could be blamed for his supposed fraud. As Adrian's wife, any money she possessed could be portrayed as part of a scheme to gain Blackwood's fortune. Most importantly, Adrian's guilt over Nathaniel's death made him easy to manipulate. The plan succeeded because Adrian repeatedly chose not to verify what stood before him. Percival's authority allowed him to remove ledgers, forge eviction notices, submit fraudulent bonds, and transform Clara's assistance to military families into evidence of theft. He intended to buy the estate's debts, seize the unentailed lands, and leave Adrian with a title attached to little more than an empty house. The magistrate ordered Percival arrested for fraud, forgery, theft, arson, intimidation of witnesses, and conspiracy to dispossess lawful tenants. His accomplices were detained before sunset. The missing ledgers were discovered inside a locked compartment beneath his carriage, still bearing Captain Harrow's original evidence labels. Their recovery stopped the auction permanently. Every cottage purchased with stolen pension money was placed in a protected trust for military families. Percival's private property was seized to repay the fund, restore the Vale estate, and compensate those he had threatened. Nathaniel's name was cleared publicly. Adrian's was not. He stood before the same creditors and families who had witnessed Clara's humiliation. "My uncle forged the evidence," he said, "but he did not force me to ignore the truth." He named every warning Clara had given him: the disturbed seal, the matching ribbon, the impossible payment, the signature stamp, and the missing ledgers. I saw enough to question him. I chose not to because questioning him threatened my finances, my position, and my pride. Lady Blackwood suffered publicly because of my decisions. Therefore, the correction must also be public. Adrian surrendered his position on the military charity board. He sold his hunting estate and London residence to repay every remaining loss rather than raise tenant rents. He dismissed the petition demanding Clara reside at Briar House and signed a new legal agreement, placing her maternal trust, the restored Vale property, and all its income beyond Blackwood control. Finally, he returned her wedding ring. "I used marriage to satisfy a debt I believed I owed your brother," he said. "I will not use it now to claim a right to your future." Clara accepted the ring but did not put it on. She moved into the restored Vale house, with Mrs. Moore's family living in one of its cottages. The former coaching house became a permanent office where military widows could verify pensions, challenge false records, and learn bookkeeping skills. For 6 months, Adrian did not ask Clara to return. Each week, he sent a report documenting the restitution he had completed. He did not include flowers, declarations of love, or requests for forgiveness. Clara read every report. She answered none. Then, on the first anniversary of Nathaniel's death, Adrian came to the Vale office, carrying a plain wooden box. Inside were hundreds of pension cards. "What are these?" Clara asked. "The names Percival removed from the official register. I want to restore them. You have clerks. They did not erase these people. My signature allowed that. She studied him. The confident Duke, who had once believed protection meant deciding where she lived now, stood before her without authority over the room, the records, or the woman behind the desk. Sit down, she said. Adrian took the chair opposite her. For 3 hours, Clara taught him how to compare service numbers, death notices, and payment records. He made mistakes. She corrected him without gentleness, and he accepted every correction. When the final widow's name had been restored, Adrian closed the register. I know I have no right to ask you to come home. Blackwood Hall was never my home. Then may I ask whether I can earn a place in the life you have built? Clara opened the small drawer containing her wedding ring. You married me because you believed I was your obligation. I know now that you were the person holding together everything I claimed to protect. I do not forgive you yet. I will not hurry you, and if forgiveness comes, temptation us to the marriage we had. I would not want it to. Clara lifted the ring but did not place it upon her finger. Instead, she set it on the ledger between them. You may return next Thursday. There are 73 pension cases still unresolved. A quiet hope entered Adrian's face. Will you be here? But this is my office. You are the one asking permission to enter. For the first time since their wedding, he smiled without guilt or entitlement. The following Thursday, Adrian arrived early. Clara found him outside with his gloves removed and ink already staining his fingers. She unlocked the door, but he did not cross the threshold until she stepped aside. A year earlier, church bells had announced a marriage built upon obligation, while Adrian promised Clara everything except his heart. Now the office bell rang as military families entered, carrying letters, records, and names that deserved to be remembered. Adrian looked at Clara. She did not promise to stay forever. She simply handed him the first ledger. This time, it was enough.